and welcome to Geek Corning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech and more into one place. This week, we're gonna chat quite a bit about tires, as well as get you up to date with some tech news. And of course, we've got some of your tech questions to answer as well. Some of them include headsets, our favorite topic of all. I'm Sue Loppanen, and joining me this week, we've got a full crew: Dave Rome, Brad Copeland, as well as Ronan McLaughlin. How is everyone doing?
Well, I'm doing wonderfully. I could just start this off and tell you that. I always love this conversation. I look forward to it every week.
You're an hour ahead of yourself this week, aren't you, Brad?
I am.
So
but I'm still here. So it's quantum me.
It turns out time zones are hard. So, but we're all here.
we're all here. And yeah, with that, we're going to get into the show. We're going to start off with a little correction to what we were talking about last week about chain waxing. Dave, do you want to tell what is the correct temperatures for chain waxing?
Yeah, it was related to a Ask a Wrench episode from last week, and we now have a little corrections corner. We're talking about what temperature to pull your chain out of the molten wax at. And it seems like there's been some updates. So Silca no longer recommends that sort of low 60s, below 60 degree temperature. They're now most recently apparently claiming closer to 75 degrees is correct, which is also happens to be the minimum temperature of its own chain waxing system. So yeah, that's a bit of an update. While Zero Friction Cycling still recommends closer to 90 degrees, which is like the general waxing temperature, they base that on original Friction Facts testing, which had shown that, I guess that testing didn't really show any significant improvement in the chain wax performance if you pulled it at lower temperatures, and in fact pulling at lower temperatures tended to show a longer break-in period. So Adam at Zero Friction still is saying do it at 90 degrees, but yeah, each their own. I don't think either one's wrong. You'll just probably have a very slightly longer break-in period with 75 degrees, but Silca is claiming that gives slightly better longevity to the chain, but I don't think they've actually shared any data on that matter just yet. So there you go, little update.
Yeah, rather than really exactly a correction, but yeah. Okay, with that correction out of the way, does anyone have anything on their mind this week? Ronan?
I've got something on my mind. I think it's happening again.
What's happening again, Ronan?
What's happening again, I fear, is that for whatever reason, and I'm sure we're about to discuss whatever the reason is, tire manufacturers are now undersizing their tires within the tolerances of what they're permitted, but like on the smaller side of the tolerances permitted, and rim manufacturers are starting to increase their rim sizes to the outer sizes of tolerance. Not in every case, but in some cases I've experienced recently. And as such, I've just spent 3 weeks trying to get a set of tires onto a pair of wheels.
Probably not the best use of 3 weeks.
Probably not. I'm exaggerating slightly in that I sort of tackled it and stepped away and tackled it again a couple of days later and gave up. But I've spent a considerable amount of time trying to get a set of tires on a set of rims. And this all happened before, I think, when Tubeless Road first came in. I remember there you could have got very unlucky where you had got a set of tires and a set of rims that more or less just were practically impossible to get the tires onto because of what I just described about the sizes and that. Back then, we all lamented it and thought it was a real pain. And I've come to the conclusion that actually it's a good thing. And you're all going to hate me for saying that, but that's my conclusion. And that more and more brands are going to hookless road. That sort of seems to be inevitable. And actually, if you think about it, if tires are incredibly hard to get on a rim, it maybe also means they're more difficult to get off a rim in the event of a sudden deflation. And I've changed my approach to tire selection, where previously I wanted something supple that went on really, really easily, and that was sort of a proxy measure for if it was a fast tire or not. It was light, it was supple, it went on easy. And I'm now in the camp of, if a tire is impossible to get on, it's probably the safest tire you can put on a hookless rim. And I do mean kind of impossible. Like, I'm not going to name the tire or the rim because it's kind of irrelevant, and I haven't yet reviewed that wheel set because I can't get the tires onto it, and I will mention it in the review. But yeah, it's just got me thinking that actually, we talk so much about hookless working in other wheeled vehicle scenarios. What we don't often mention when we reference that is that actually with where hookless works really well, we need to go to a professional who has specialist equipment to mount the tires on those things. Those tires don't come off those hookless rims. And so I'm thinking maybe we need.
Well, they do come off, but rarely.
They do come off. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not even trying to get in. I realize I'm going down that rabbit hole of hookless road, and all I say, I'm not even going there. I'm just like, I have changed my decision-making process for tires, and I now prefer tires that are much more difficult to get on and off, and that may mean a bit of a pain at the side of the road if I get a puncture, but it may also just mean hookless or hooked, and I know they're not specific terms for it, but
I will both agree and disagree with you. I agree with the sentiment that a tire that fits too easily scares me, and that, a tire that goes on so easily by hand and to the point that you can actually remove it by hand in a tubeless application, I shy away from. And there are still some combos out there on the market. Like, I think they're better now, but the previous generation of Panaracer tires, for example, used to scare me in that regard. And there have been more than a few reports of rapid deflation in a workshop with those setups. I unfortunately do know some mechanics that wouldn't actually even install Panaracer tubeless tires for customers at one point because of risk of the tire just popping itself off.
Well, you've already mentioned it there, but just to be fair to Panaracer, I have a set of Panaracer tires on a set of hookless rims here that haven't come off. So
and they have fixed that. But I think this is an issue from a few years ago. But the flip side of that is I think there is sort of a happy middle ground here, and tires that are too hard to get on, that require tie levers or multiple tie levers and a lot of sweat to do. I think, one, you risk stretching or damaging the bead in the process of installing them. So therefore you increase the safety risk in just owning them because you potentially damage the tire. And two, the complete inability to do anything about them on the road is a problem. Not being able to put a tube into a tire while you're on the road is a problem. So I think the right answer is to just have tolerance tire and wheels. And I think for the most part, I think things are improving in that regard. There are still some exceptions to that rule, but I'm typically seeing a lot of nice fitting tires and rim combos coming out these days.
I mean, obviously I jest a little if you cannot get the tires onto the rim, that is useless to us. With bicycle tires, you have to maintain the option of changing them at the side of the road and fitting them yourself. But to your point, I think the actual end result, I do think where we're heading here is tire and rim homologation, and we've already seen it. It's already happening. But I
DT Swiss side and Conti.
Yeah, maybe more specifically like Zup and Goodyear. I mean, the combination released this year was specifically released together. The tire is made for that rim. I don't see Zup and Goodyear being the only manufacturers to do that. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in future. The point I was trying to make is that actually, as much as I'm a hookless skeptic, if the tires are that hard to get on and off, I'm actually, as part of my job, I have to ride hookless rims. And some of them are very good, but I've always got that bit of a question mark in the back of my mind. Rightly or wrongly, that question mark is there for me. And when these tires that have been that impossible to mount, I wouldn't have any concerns riding on them after that at the correct pressures, which I will say is significantly lower than, for myself, it's significantly lower than what the maxes are. But that's kind of that's what was on my mind this week.
Brad, any thoughts on this topic?
Well, I was just thinking you could have the best of both, where you could have a nice, soft, supple tire that also won't come off the rim, and you just use a little bit of glue, and it's called a tubular, and those have been around for a while, Ronan. You might enjoy those. You still can't get them off on the side of the road. If you puncture them, it's a huge problem, so it's the same. But the only upside is you can actually have a lightweight tire as well.
I think you should ask Roberto Heras, Bilotti, what he thinks about tubular safety on the side of the road.
Yeah. Well, there's ups and downs to everything, but I've been a curmudgeonly tubular user for a long time, and still have some on some bikes, and I occasionally bring it up on this podcast, so you have to bear with me there.
You got your quota done. So
you reminded me of something though, and that is I recently seen how Formula One tires are fitted to the tubeless straight side rims that they use, hookless rims that they use. They're mounted in that, and obviously there's a lot more it's not really a relevant comparison at all, but they do actually glue the tires to the rims also. They don't want to get tire slippage on the rim. It's less of a problem the tire coming off. It's like they don't want the rim to slip inside the tire. And it had me
Oh, like
wondering.
under rotational torque, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's something that I thought about before. Could be like top glue tubeless tires onto our rims.
Yeah. It's funny because
I've seen it
I
done.
actually have a box at the moment. I have a shoe box full of tire lever alternatives. And it's a box that's been growing recently because a lot of products are coming into the market at the moment for like tire installation aids. So yeah, there's a few that I've received very recently. I just got my hands on one from Giant Bicycles, which looks wild and has like a little felt lined pulley wheel that you drag along the rim. And I haven't used it yet. I've been told by some others that it perhaps doesn't work all that well, like all the other tire installation tools that are on the market. But yeah, anyway, that'll eventually happen as a threaded, where I just compare that to the humble Pedro's tire lever. But it is kind of indicative that brands that manufacture wheels and tire combos are having to think that they need special tools for installing tires. It sort of shows you that perhaps there's an issue here, or perhaps the issue is a good thing, as Ronan believes. So
I think it is maybe just a case of, well, I was going to say we all seen, but some of us actually reported on the news that happened earlier this year. And, I've no evidence to suggest this, but part of me does wonder, is it brands now just like further erring on the side of caution and just making things all that extra little bit tighter just to be sure?
Do you feel like after those incidents that kind of made you more hesitant about hookless and tire?
I mean, I think most people have seen my coverage of those incidents earlier this year, and coincidentally, I was very well placed to cover those because I had, about 2 or 3 weeks before those had happened, written up an opinion piece on why I don't like tubeless straight side hookless road. What actually ended up getting published, I think, was significantly toned down. I'll say that much. But yeah, no, I don't think those incidents influenced me. And I can confidently say that because I'd actually written pieces prior to them happening, albeit they didn't get published because those incidents did then happen, and so those articles were transformed into what eventually was published.
Yep. And to be clear on this topic, I mean the topic of tubeless tire fitment to the rim, like how tight that is not just relevant to hookless, right? It applies to all tubeless wheels. But yeah, I guess just specifically on the hookless road, I'm still with Ronan on it. I personally ride it comfortably and don't feel all that unsafe, and I think the product's fine, but I'm also low 70 kilograms, and I own calibrated pressure gauges, and I know the pressure I'm putting into my tires, whereas I think there's a significant education problem still in the market where bikes are being sold with hookless wheels to customers who don't know that their tire width that they're running is too narrow for their body weight, and they're potentially putting in a dangerous amount of pressure into that system. So
Dave, you and I discussed, I don't know how this topic came up recently, but I give you the example of, I was in Mallorca for a cycling holiday recently, and obviously don't bring a floor pump on a cycling holiday, so I used the floor pump in the reception, and the gauge on the floor pump was telling me 70 psi, and I was using hookless rims and tires that week. When I checked it with my own digital gauge, it was 90 psi. And I know my gauge is, I don't know it's perfectly accurate, but I know it's accurate within a very small percentage, and that's kind of what you're also up against, is like, yeah, floor pumps, track pumps, anything, they're not always accurate.
But do you want to explain, Ronan? Maybe someone doesn't know. What does it matter that you might, what's the pressure? What does it matter that if you pump them up to 90?
It matters because, and there is a safety factor involved here, but the stated maximum inflation pressure for, let's say, a 28 millimeter, a stamped 28 millimeter tire on a hookless rim is 72 psi. That maximum tire pressure limit does decrease as you increase the width of your tires. So at 30, it's going to be slightly lower, but if you go up to a 45 or a 50 mil tire, it's going to be much lower. I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but it's not 72. It's in the 50s when you get into bigger tires. And so if you are running a 28 mil tire and you pump it up to the maximum on your gauge and you think it's at 72, but it's actually at 90, and that's in the basement or the reception of a hotel where it's pretty cool because of air conditioning and that, and then you go out into a hot summer day, there is going to be, it's going to be pretty minor, but it will go up another couple of degrees yet, and safety factor or not, you're way over the safe limit.
And there is a very small safety factor with some of these combinations. Some combinations only working on a 10% safety factor. some big brands doing their own tires and rims are typically working on a 50% safety factor. So probably okay, but still not that good of an idea.
I think the requirement is 10%. But what actually
Yes.
most manufacturers is doing is way,
Yeah,
like
they're going
any
way.
responsible manufacturer is going to be way above 10%. But that's I'm hesitant even saying that because that's not licensed to go to 145% of the limit. The limit is the limit for as far as I'm concerned.
So, but yeah, beyond that issue, the other issue is like you only have to be like 85 kilograms, like completely like average weight in order to not be able to run like a 28 mil tire on some of these rims without then having to be like, to run an appropriate pressure in a 28 mil tire. And if you're 85 kilos, you're probably over that 72 PSI maximum. So for me, that's the limitation of hookless on road. Off-road, I've got zero problems about this technology. For gravel and mountain bike, it's all sweet. But for road, running actual road width tires, it's a problem, and it's a limiting problem. And I think it's a product that isn't really intended or wasn't really thought through for like a wide consumer market. Like it kind of, to me, the people that introduced this think that road cyclists are all 70 kilograms and kind of ignored anyone in the 85 plus range, which is a lot of people.
I would also say they also assume on the tire tightness that they have very, very strong hands, because
Yes, sure.
it's like you're very skinny, you have excellent hand strength to get the tires on. It's not a good combo that I have.
The other thing I'll say is like it for me as well. It does mean that I'll not choose, but I will ride hookless rims without issue. But I will do a couple of things to ensure my own safety or whatever, and that includes increasing the tire size, decreasing the pressure. And if you are thinking performance, if you're performance minded, there are no guarantees that that's going to be the optimal setup. And so there are question marks there. I can't really comment on whether wider and lower pressure is faster or not, because it's so independent, but it's also so like, there's so much going on in that space right now that the answers aren't even clear yet. I don't think. Tires are getting wider all the time, pressures are getting lower all the time. So yeah, that may not be an issue, but right now, some performance environments and for some riders, you may well end up on a tire that's not your optimal. You might not care about that at all, but a lot of people do care.
Yep. So anyway, before we move on, I guess, to summarize, if I'm recommending a pure road wheel these days, I'm still recommending one with hooks to people. It's, open to tire compatibility. You don't have to run tubeless tires if you don't want to. And also it gets around these pressure limitations that we're talking about. So
Yeah, it's a good conclusion. And you might not need as much strength to get the tires back on. I actually only took half a day to get tires on hookless wheels just last weekend.
It's a good thing.
Took me 2 coffees because I had made one before, and then I started it. I was just sweating and my hands started to hurt so much. So I was like, these are not coming off. So I made another coffee.
you should put the coffee in the tire with the rim. It might aid, like use it as like a bead slip. It might help.
Is that a recommendation, Brad? Would you recommend that at the shop?
2 coffees. Yes, I would recommend that before doing any work on your bike. That's how I always approach everything. So 2 coffees first, and then you should be all set.
Anything.
If we want to morph this on your mind into a PSA, I'm sure Brad could give us some advice on mounting tight tires, because you don't want to be wrenching at it with the tire lever, because you can do some serious damage.
Yeah, so that's a good point. The rim bed on some rims is shallower than others, it seems, or has like a center channel that goes a little bit deeper. Generally speaking, the recommended kind of technique is to center the bead of the tire as deep in the channel on like sort of the opposite side of the rim that you're struggling with at the end of the mounting procedure. But really all the way around, if you can really center that bead, it kind of allows the tire to be pulled as far in the other direction. The side you're struggling with at the end, in other words, can be a little more flexible if you are able to successfully center that bead of the tire in the sort of centermost, deepest part of the rim channel as you're attempting to mount it. And that's kind of a little bit of a technique thing that you'll find, but especially with like carbon rims, you really don't want to be leveraging against them with the tire lever too much if it's a tight fit, because you can not just damage the bead, which is very true and a good point to make, Dave, especially with tubeless. You can really actually compromise the safety of the setup by damaging the bead, and it doesn't take that much effort with like a hard tool against a hard rim to actually do that. So do be careful with that. But you can also, it's a much more expensive problem to have if you sort of leverage against the carbon bead of the rim itself on a clincher that you can actually crack or damage the rim. So be very careful to the extent you can do it barehanded and try to stuff that bead centered in the channel and work it with your thumbs. It will hurt. It may require 2 coffees, but that's definitely going to be the sort of most foolproof outcome, I would say.
Yep. To add to that, 2 thoughts. If you are using a tire lever, stick to plastic tire levers. If it's starting to flex, you're putting too much force into it. And the other thing is on tubeless, finish at the valve. Because the valve stem will sit in that rim well that Brad's talking about, and it will stop the tire from sitting perfectly down. So if you finish at the valve, you sort of get that little extra slackness that lets you play with. I actually do the opposite for inner tubes, but that's a different story. So
yeah. I'm the same way, and that's a good point, and I forgot to mention it, but that's definitely how I like to do it, finishing at the valve, and you can usually get the most slack out of the tire that way.
Mm-hmm. I do want to redeem myself a little bit before we move on and just mention that a lot of riders in the local club come to me to fit tires that they have not been able to get fitted, and then I do it with like just my hands in 30 seconds flat, and they're looking at me like I'm some sort of magician or something. So I can fit tires, but this combination I was working on was so tight that once I got the bead on one side, I got one side of the tire on, it was so tight the bead could not be moved in that central channel, and so I couldn't then get the bead from the other side into the channel to allow me to do exactly what you just described.
Is it a 650C tire by chance?
Is the rim taped?
It sure felt like it. The rim is taped. The rim tape is going to have to be redone because now I've then gone and fitted other tires to it, which proves that it's a tire individual thing. It's not across all tires, and fitted them with just my hands, so no issues there. But then in trying to inflate it, it became clear that the rim tape I had identified as being shoddily applied is too shoddily applied and is an issue. And so you can imagine my frustration had I got that tight tire on, only to realize that then I would have to take it off again and then go get rim tape and then reapply rim tape. And
that tight tire you're talking about, have you applied it to other rims?
I have, yes.
And it went on okay?
Yes. So it went on. It was certainly
problem. Okay.
One of the things that I had noted about it was that it was tighter to get on than like a GP 5000 that I've fitted countless tires of. I would say it was somewhere between a GP 5000 and a Challenge on other rims that I've fitted it to. But this combination of this rim that I've just got and this tire is I'm going to go ahead and say impossible.
Ronan, I'm going to ask the question that everyone's screaming at their at their AirPods at the moment. What's the tire that fits tighter?
You know what? I'll tell you which tire it is because, as I said, I think this is a good thing, and it's a tire I've liked a lot this year, and it's the new Pirelli P0 RS or whatever it's called. And so on this rim that I've been working with, that I'm working on a review on, so I will identify the rim at a later point. It's been a tough combination, but on other rims, as I've said, it's gone on tighter than GP 5000s and tighter than the lower tires, but in a way that I quite like.
Yep. Okay. For me, that tells me like I have a set of original Roval Alpinist at home, which I know fit crazy tight as a rim. Like a lot of tires are really hard to get onto that. So from that information, I probably wouldn't purchase those Pirellis for that rim, but for other rims that I know fit easier, I would consider them. So thank you, Ronan.
That is a lot of chat about tires. Yes.
I'm tired. That's tiring.
It's so tiring. So we've talked a lot about tires already, but we're going to talk a bit more about tire pressures because we're going to pick one of our favorite. Well, I guess we're each going to pick our favorite tire pressure calculator. There's loads out there, or you can just do, you might not use a calculator, you might do the little squeeze on your tire and that might be your favorite. We'll see what's your favorite.
There are loads.
There are loads.
I think there are going to be more. I think we're going to see big changes in tire pressure calculators in the near future. Before, I'm going to let Dave and Brad go first for their pick ones. But before we do, I've actually got some data on this, because I recently asked Instagram, or the people on Instagram to be more specific, what they do with their tire pressure calculator recommendations. Do they use the same pressure? Do they use higher? Do they use lower? And 59% of respondents, admittedly it was only 80 people that responded, but anyway, let's get past that. 59% said they run lower. And it was the same throughout the comments, people saying that they run lower and why they run lower and this, that and the other. So I'll put that bit of information out there before we dive into the conversation.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, like, as far as tire pressure calculators go, I'd say there are two that most people will be aware of, which is the Zip online calculator and the Silka online calculator. Both are free to use. And then there's the one that we discussed recently, which is Wolftooth recently introduced an app and a website that has a tire calculator more aimed at off-road, so it does gravel, mountain bike. So yeah, I mean, for me, I find the Zip calculator tends to be too low for a lot of applications. I find it sort of, I get squirmy feeling tires. So yeah, I like the Silka pressure calculator for road use, and I've taken to quite liking the Wolftooth calculator for off-road use. That's what I've been recommending lately, and it seems to get you pretty close. I would say I perhaps in some cases run maybe a little bit lower in some combinations, but yeah, it's sort of it gets you close, and then from there you can play with it a bit. Off-road, I'd recommend going down to the point that you start to feel the rim and then add a PSI from there. But yeah, I mean, I'd be keen to hear from Brad on this one, because Brad's obviously spent a lot of time thinking about optimization of tire pressures.
Yeah, I kind of was going to say a lot of the same things that you did, and I'll say what I like about tire pressure calculators in general, that it is that maybe for some folks anyway, because of the many sort of inputs that they ask for in order to calculate your tire pressure, not just necessarily, tire and rim specifications, but other things too, like, temperature and that kind of,
Which one asks for temperature?
Is that the Wolftooth one, Dave,
the
that we
Wolftooth
talked
one
about?
asks for temperature. Yeah.
We talked about that on the podcast several episodes back once as like a tech item that we dove into it.
Yep, yeah. The Wolftooth one's really cool. It asks you for like your indoor, like your temperature that you're inflating at, and then the expected temperature throughout the day. So it'll like recommend based on like, basically where you end up riding.
Exactly. And so I think it's useful because it sort of brings to light all the many variables that can affect the ride quality that you experience, whether you've set your pressure in your mind to what you think it is. A lot of different variables can unfold after that moment where your pressure may be wildly different. Like pavement temperature, if you're on a road bike and you set it inside or in your garage in the shade, the temperature of the pavement can be like, orders of magnitude hotter than that air temperature was. And so over a couple of hours on the road, that will definitely heat up the air inside your tire quite a bit. And so most recently, to answer the question, I've been using the Zip one, but I've had some Zip 353 NSW wheels with on my most recent road bike. So I was kind of referencing that. The rim widths were wider, so that kind of changes my expectation versus rims I'd experienced at a narrower width. But that's an important variable to consider too. So I kind of use that as a baseline. I don't set it and never think about it again. I kind of take the feelings that I get from the road, or if it's, wet or going to get hotter as I ride or whatever the case, I might make some small adjustments, but kind of use the figure that the calculator provides as more of like a baseline or a starting point, and then sort of tweak it to suit my tastes from there. But I had good success with the Zip, I would say.
Okay.
For
Brad,
road.
Let's just say you're dealing with a gravel athlete, and you're wanting to dial in their pressures to figure out what they should be running for, as a baseline for the season. What would you be doing? Would you run it just through a calculator and see how you go, or is there sort of a trial and error that you'd approach?
I would do a little bit of a trial and error. It would also be somewhat dependent on whether we were going to run inserts, or if we were, then it might change some of the thought process. And I would say that sometimes I would run inserts or recommend it, and other times not. So I have some thoughts about inserts that affect tire pressure theory too, because it occupies some of the volume within the tire. It kind of changes the calculation a bit compared to if it didn't have an insert in there, and you might run actually higher pressure as though the tire itself were narrower or the chamber was smaller to compensate for that. That's one kind of sidebar. But in general, I like your approach, Dave, where you kind of want to run it about as low as you safely can before you're starting to impact the rim. So when I'm working with like a pro rider, you spend a lot of time with those folks and have the opportunity to really discuss nuance at great length. And so a lot of it is feedback based, feeling based. Again, we all kind of know the theory that, especially on an off-road surface, really the lowest that you can safely run is most likely going to be better, both for grip, for rolling resistance, and potentially for the comfort if you're on the bike for 4 hours in a 5 hours race, on a gravel race like these long ones can be. Sometimes just the comfort factor alone is a reason enough to push the low pressure. Yeah, it would be a combination of variables, but a lot of conversation would inform those decisions too in the end.
Yeah, cool. Ron, I'm keen to hear from you on your pick one, but also what you would do to optimize. Like Brad just told you how to optimize for off-road. I'd be keen to hear from a road point of view what you're doing to refine your pressures.
Yeah. Do you want what I do, or do you want what should be done? Because what I do is I consult a tire pressure calculator, and I leave it at that because I just haven't got the bandwidth to think about it any further. I mean, what should actually be done is like there is testing that can be done to sort of, you can do like Chung method testing at various speeds. It's Chung method testing, virtual elevation testing is usually done to like calculate what your CDA is, your aerodynamics. But if you do it at variable speeds, you can work out your rolling resistance. From that, then you could work out what's your optimal tire pressure. I don't know of anybody who has the time to be doing that. And so tire pressure calculators. And then, to be honest, same sort of thing, bit of trial and error. Those are always a starting point for me, especially with gravel, but also on the road, where I'll start with, and I use a Silca one, honestly, just because I'm in the habit of using it. Haven't really experimented with many of the others. I have tried the Zip one and liked it. But again, it gave me a number that I was much lower than I was expecting. And then so you get this sort of subconscious bias towards it, probably, that is probably unfair. And so I've used the Silca, but then usually probably end up dropping down from the recommended pressure and probably end up close to the Zip one anyway. So
Yeah. I mean, the Zip calculator, like, to be fair, like the pressures aren't necessarily wrong, but I find the feeling on the road is I get like tire squirm when I run their recommended pressures, whereas Silca tends to get me closer to how I like the tire to feel. Yeah, I'm not saying which one's right or wrong, but it's just the Silca tends to be more in line with my preference for what a road bike should feel like.
If I did say one was right or wrong, I should rescind that comment because I don't know if one is right or wrong.
Sure. Yeah.
As I just demonstrated, I have not tested them. But yeah, that's where I'm at. I do though have a few wishes for the Silca one, again, just because it's the one I use. When I type in tire pressure into my Chrome app on my phone, it populates that one straight away because it's the one I've gone to, and that's probably why I land there. But I do wish it would give you, like, you have to put in a width for your tires, a measured width. I wish it would give you front and rear, because often I'm running variable widths front and rear, and even in terms of tire width, but then also like the inner rim widths of asymmetrical rim profiles front to rear could end up giving you a different measuring width tire, even though you're using the same tire front and rear. And
this SRAM one does give you that.
Its SRAM one probably does, yes. Yeah. So I'm as I said, I'm just using the Silca one out of habit. An inner rim width, which is another measurement I know other manufacturers or other calculators give you the option on, the Silca doesn't. And so, yeah, perhaps I just need to try more of them.
That's a very key point with all of these tire pressure calculators, is measured width is everything to getting a number that's actually worth having. The claimed width on your tire is not necessarily going to be anywhere close to the measured width. So this is where a set of cheap digital calipers or vernier calipers is crucial to using these calculators, and to understand your actual measured width is very important to these being close to useful. Yeah, I would say perhaps don't bother if you don't know your measured width. It's that kind of level of importance. So, but yeah, Suvi, we haven't covered yours. What's your pick one of these?
I don't have a pick one at all. I do use them kind of all to figure out. I think it is so much to do, to kind of almost summarize what you've been talking about. It is to do with feel as well. Like, I often ride mixed surfaces as well, so whatever calculator I go to, I'll choose road, but then I'm on a bike that I can do a bit of gravel with, and I'm gonna go on gravel, and then I'll just lower the pressure on the go, or But I think it's more to do on the road. I'll probably more likely to stay on the road and the pressure is going to be the same. But gravel specifically, many rides, I want to change the pressure in the middle of the ride because the surface completely changes. And yeah, but these are really, like, I think the pressure guides are great at determining a starting point. And I would usually kind of, if I am at that point where I'm trying to figure out a new combination of equipment that I have, I'm going to go there and see what the different ones give me and then kind of see how those feel and go kind of somewhere. Maybe it's going to be in the middle, maybe one of them is going to be right. But yeah.
This is probably getting a little into the weeds, but I actually have a chart that I exported from the Silka calculator that goes in 1 millimeter gradients from like 25 through to 40 for road, and then I've got another chart for gravel tires, and I use that as my baseline for every test bike. So I'll get the measured width, and then that way I know that like whatever the measured width of the tire is, I'm kind of running the same recommended equivalent pressure in the tires.
But then the bike weight, do you take the bike weight into the calculations?
Well, I mean, my own weight would fluctuate as much as a road bike weight would, so...
Oh, hold on a second. Are you telling me you use these calculators without like stepping on a scales like literally seconds beforehand with your bike and bottles and everything in hand? Because I mean that's kind of what you have to do.
I'm going rogue.
Oh my god, I can't handle this.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. I'm also not factoring the outside temperature into my final outside temperature is not being factored into the pressure that I'm setting my tires at in the morning.
I'd argue the pressure, the temperature probably isn't as big though. Like, so easy to forget that when you go into these, that you would, like Ronan mentioned, bottles, that if you are actually going for a long ride, you might have like 3 kilos extra on your bike if you got 2 1.5 liter bottles on your bike. And that is, I think, I mean, at least for my weight, it's quite substantially percentage wise increasing the setup weight, or even just it might be half of your bike weight if you put that on it. It's not to be ignored.
Fair.
Suvi's now making the case for a Grava or a Scope tire pressure adjustment.
A couple of weeks ago, we all poo-pooed the Grava hub, you know?
Yeah.
And here we are. We need to change our pressure 5 times during our ride. That's the only way to do it. We got to all have a Grava hub now.
I think I was the most skeptical of
that. But you're the one who would get the most benefit from the sound of how you ride your bike and all the pressure changes you want to make throughout the course of the ride, Suvi. So,
also, am I really optimizing it, or am I just going by feel? I think the latter. So I'm not racing. If I was, then it would be a different story.
Escape Collective has a motto, but I've altered it, and optimizing his life is my new motto.
I like that because it's not stolen from Ted Lasso.
Dave, I want to pick up a point that you raised there that's a pet peeve of mine. You were harping on the tires there for not being the measured. They don't measure the width that they state on the side of them.
Yeah.
And I just want to clarify the reason for that most often is that tire manufacturers, if they're making let's take an example, a 28 millimeter tire, they have to design it around a 19 millimeter inner rim.
Mm-hmm.
But that 28 millimeter tire is also compatible with anything from a 15 to a 23 millimeter inner rim, and so putting it on various inner rim widths will change the width. The chances are, if you've got a tire that doesn't measure what it says in the sidewall, if you put it on the design rim width for that tire width, it probably will then measure what the stated width is on the sidewall of the tire,
or near to. But not exactly.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. If it's manufactured and designed correctly, it should be pretty damn on it. Yeah,
yeah.
And they're adhering to standards when they're manufacturing.
There is still manufacturing variance in a tire.
Yeah.
So yeah, even if you put that 28 mil tire on a 19 mil rim, it's in a batch of 10 tires, you probably will see some variance, as you would on a set of scales.
It shouldn't be like 2 mil out though. It should be a small.
No, sure.
Small, yeah.
So anyway, I think we've exhausted this topic, but
we have exhausted tires completely.
Do we have to move on?
We do have to move on if we want to get into any other topics. Well, with the tire topic completely covered for another week at least, we're gonna get into some other tech news, because there are other things to talk about than just tires as well. Dave, first off, there's a new MRP.
New tires.
Oh, there probably are some new tires out there as well, aren't there? But we're not going to talk about those if there are any. But there's a new cage. This is a really tongue twister for me. A cage guard. I find it very hard to say. Cage guard.
MRP, which is kind of a company probably best known for its bash guards. I mean, they do suspension and various other things these days. But they've decided that the transmission derailleur cage, so SRAM transmission, the T-type mountain bike derailleurs, are too vulnerable to rock damage at the lower part of the cage, and so they've released a Delrin thermoplastic bumper guard that you bolt onto your derailleur cage, and it sort of protects the lower bit from like rock strikes. And it's a $30 product, and it seems gimmicky, and it seems like one of those products that just doesn't need to exist. But having actually seen these cages get damaged at that very lower corner from like a rock strike that bumps that part of the cage in towards the pulley wheel, I'm actually not hating this product. I actually think it makes sense. $30 if you ride in really rocky stuff and tend to smack your derailleur on things, this may actually be worth considering.
Yeah, replacing those derailleurs ain't cheap. So if that's the type of riding you do, it's certainly a consideration you could make, because $800 for a derailleur these days is
I mean those derailleurs you don't have to replace, you just replace the lower cage assembly, but that's still a couple of $100 last I looked at some of these. So I mean the transmission derailleur has that, the lower cage assembly is kind of the sacrificial lamb of it, where it just, if you ruin it, if a stick takes it, then you can literally replace the whole cage assembly without any tools. But maybe this might be one of those ways that you just, get yourself out of that accidental hit one more time. So anyway, fun little product.
Yeah, and save some money. And speaking of money, Thule has purchased Quadlock for $500 million Australian dollars.
Yep.
I think they are, but still a lot of dollars.
Yeah, it's a lot of phone cases.
Yeah.
So the Australian phone case company that make that sort of twist lock to mount your phone onto a bicycle, and they've since expanded that into all sorts of markets. They do mounts for motorcycles, for cars, for aeroplanes. They've become quite a large company, and they do phone cases for like every smartphone. Yeah, they've just become part of the Thule brand. So Thule has a bit of a history for acquiring other brands, and that's how they got into like backpacks and soft goods and rear racks. They've also done, and they've bought a baby carrier brand in the past. I'm really struggling to remember the original names of all these, because they've done such a good job of integrating them into the Thule name in recent years. And dare I say, I would imagine that Quadlock will eventually phase into the Thule branding as well. But that remains to be seen. But yeah, it's a big sum of money. So congrats to Quadlock on achieving that.
Yeah, definitely. And then we have a new bike from Stinner Frameworks in the US. So they've launched this new Stinner Select program. So their kind of custom-made bikes are actually available a little bit quicker and in kind of stock builds, also frame only. They've got them ready to ship. And the first model that they've launched as part of this program is the Carrizo, which is an all-road bike. And it is quite an appealing looking bike in that it also comes fully built, retailing for less than $4,000, which for something, especially I think for people who do live in the US, it's something made relatively locally, and still a relatively small maker as well. It's a good price for a bike.
Yeah, $4K US for a complete bike that of a handmade US made steel frame is pretty cool. Yeah, just on this, so like Stinner they do custom bikes in various materials like steel, titanium, but this one is still made in-house, but it's what you call stock geometry. So they're kind of you're picking off a sizing chart, and they have sort of batch built them. So you're not able to customize the geometry, but it is still a handmade US made bike. So it's pretty cool. I like it. It's in a point where everything seems to be getting more expensive. Under just under $4,000 US for a complete bike is pretty nice. So
Definitely is.
well done.
Yeah. And from US, we're going to go into Iceland for last bit of tech news from Lauf. They've got a new patent out for a titanium 3D printed freehub poles, if they can't even be called poles.
Yeah, and also they might not be titanium 3D printed. It's just that is suggested that might be a good material. So I mean the story with this patent is the product doesn't exist yet, but they have this idea to basically turn the poles into the spring. Is probably the simplest way to say it. So you have the poles that are directly connected to the drive ring. Yeah, they're made of a flexible metal that naturally finds its way up. So yeah, if you understand how a free hub works, they're basically removing the separate spring from the pole and just making the pole flexible. Some of the pattern drawings show a design that in theory would be like almost instant engagement. But more importantly, the design could also be done in a way that one pole would engage, and then sort of as the material flexes or as the hub comes under load, further poles would engage, and basically as a result of that, they're saying that tolerances don't need to be as high as normal because the material ductility or flex would naturally overcome some manufacturing tolerance variance. So it's pretty cool. It sounds like they might be in discussion with other brands about licensing this design. But yeah, it's an interesting one and it's a neat one, and it's cool to see like such a simple concept, in a sense, simplified even further. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. I think durability and use of material will be the limiting one of this, but looks neat.
Yeah, and we'll see what comes out of it once the product is out there.
Mm-hmm.
That was all of our tech bits from this week. Tech news bits. We're going to have a little break and then we're going to get to your questions. So our first question is from Andrew Ruckle in Calgary, Alberta, and he's been using his bike, as many of us do, Canelo Super 6 Evo SE for both gravel and cyclocross, and been swapping between 1x and 2x, but then he's made more changes and has some issues with the setup.
My question for you is that this summer I decided to go make a change and switch to a 1x mullet setup in the summer, using a GX Eagle Axis rear derailleur, a SRAM XO 1052 cassette in the back, and my plan was to use the same dub wide crankset with a single ring, probably a 42 or a 44 tooth chainring. I believe this is the same setup that Cannondale Pros Alex Howes and Ted King ride. However, when I got this all set up, I get a lot of noise while under power in the 11, 12, and 13 tooth cogs. Oddly, the 10 tooth cog is silent. It's just those the next three cogs up from the 10 in the back. I get a horrible noise. Trying to figure out what would cause that. My suspicion is that the chain may be catching in each of those gears. The chain may be catching on one of the profiled teeth on the next biggest cog up, but I don't know why that would be happening. I've sent Instagram messages to Ted King and Alex Howes. They have confirmed that this is the same setup that they run. So I'm struggling to identify what this problem would be. My initial thought was that this bike was originally designed to work just with the AI crankset, and that maybe my spindle, the wide spindle, was the issue. However, I did some wizardry to push out the chain line 3 millimeters or 3.5 millimeters, which should make the chain line normal, quote unquote, and the problem still persists. Just wondering whether you guys have any advice on what might be causing the noise and how I might be able to fix it. The cassette and chain are both Eagle, as I said, a 1052 XO cassette and an XX chain, both of which were purchased new from Bike Closet, which I sometimes wonder if it could be part of the issue. It's kind of a gray market site. The derailleur was bought new secondhand, and I've tried both SRAM X-Sync chainrings and I've tried a Gabaric chainring. They both seem to have the same issue. Any advice you could give would be great. Thank you.
Well, this is a tricky one. If everything is worn the same, that's one variable I would be curious about. If you sometimes you get like a favorite gears kind of exacerbated wear in a small range of your cassette where you spend the most time, and then you get similar kind of intolerance between chain and cassette teeth in those gears, but not necessarily in other ones. I was curious as I was first reading this question, and then I think Andrew actually kind of jumped to a conclusion that I was thinking about as well, which there are a lot of fakes out there. I've seen a lot of fake Shimano stuff ordered online, and the symptoms were not unlike what you're describing, where you just get horrible drivetrain noise that is otherwise unexplainable. The other question I would have is what generation of Axis this is, if it's transmission stuff or if it's the first generation.
It's the earlier generation, yeah.
It's the original, okay. And I would ask then if that XX1 chain that you have is black, because SRAM did in fact have sort of a quietly acknowledged issue with their black treated Eagle XX1 Eagle chain, that it made creaky noises under load. And your question doesn't specify really whether this is exclusive to like when it's under load or if it's happening like in the work stand too. If it's in the work stand though, you should probably be able to see whether it's touching the neighbor cog to the largest cog next to it. If that's in fact what it's doing, then it would sound more like a chainline issue than anything. But if it's not doing that, then I would look at one of the other three options, whether it was one of those black chains. I've seen it myself a number of times, couldn't figure it out, and then ultimately was told by SRAM later on that they had some issues with that plating on those black Eagle chains. So something to think about. But otherwise, yeah, I would explore whether it's in fact a real chain and or cassette if you're ordering it from an online source that's admittedly a gray area.
My thought process on this was whether everything is straight, whether the hanger is perfectly straight, and whether the process used to straighten it and the tool used is actually great. Like these hangers need to be really, really straight for Eagle to work perfectly, and like a sloppy fitting derailleur hanger tool is probably not going to get it straight enough. Like that tolerance does matter. The other question was, is the derailleur itself straight? Because I have had some derailleurs, and it's an issue with 12-speed where everything's so finicky that even the slightest little bend in say like the cage assembly, you probably won't be able to see it. You won't be able to pick it up by eye, but it's there, and you kind of don't realize it, or you can't isolate it until you try a different derailleur, and then all of a sudden everything goes away and everything starts working perfectly. So you mentioned the derailleur's quite new, but I mean, Andrew described the derailleur's bought new secondhand. Like even that, like, you know, not being in its original packaging, maybe it got damaged in shipping. Maybe it was damaged on the shelf. So yeah, I'd be checking the derailleur hanger. I'd also be seeing if you can, this might be something for a shop to do, but you know, whether installing a new derailleur just to test that as sort of diagnostics, whether that fixes the issue. So yeah, it's probably one of all of the above.
I had one other thought, Dave, as you were talking, because it reminded me of something that I've seen before that was on this generation of SRAM, Mountain Eagle type rear derailleur, Gen 1, let's call it. It was actually a GX1, but it was a brand new, like new derailleur out of the package on a new bike. And one of the pins that holds like the outer link of the parallelogram, you know, to the body of the derailleur had kind of like a loose fit, and you could, if you looked closely and kind of mess with it with your own hands, you could actually sort of flex the body of like the parallelogram structure of the derailleur and see like quite a bit of like lateral movement there. Like it kind of rocked. It wasn't like a tight fit, so it was kind of sloppy. And so under some load and in some kind of cross chain, like angled like loads on the derailleur cage, it would pull the derailleur out of alignment. So even though the hanger was straight, and everything measured well with the high quality derailleur, hanger alignment gauge, blah, 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 everything you just said. When it was actually on the bike, the sort of side loading from the chain coming from an angle into the derailleur actually caused the parallelogram to flex out of plane, basically, so it sat crooked. And that's another one that I've seen. So maybe like get down there with the flashlight in your hands and see if you can do that on your own bike, Andrew, and maybe you'll see there's an issue with your derailleur that in this case was warranted. So, given it was a secondhand purchase, that may or may not be true, but that may be at least identifying a potential source as well.
Yeah, this does remind me of a random thought, which is increasingly I'm of the opinion that shop mechanics should consider a batch of brand new derailleurs to be diagnostic tools. Like have an Eagle derailleur, have a Shimano 12-speed derailleur, have a Ultegra 11-speed derailleur, and have them in the toolbox as like diagnosing shifting issues. It's crazy that we've come to this space, but yeah, I actually see them as tools now. So anyway.
Cool. That's answered. Next up, we've got a question from Clark in Seattle, Washington.
I've got a set of SRAM codes that's on the way to upgrade the brakes on my mountain bike. It's a Santa Cruz Tallboy. So the frame has got fully guided routing internal, but I've never done this procedure before, the cutting of brake lines and things like that. And so I'm just wondering, I've got the standard SRAM instructions. I've also read through the Escape Collective Discord super in-depth brake bleeding procedure, which is awesome. But I was wondering, geeks, Dave and Brad, if you had any tips, any gotchas, any things you wish you had known before you had done this the first time, cutting brake lines and, sticking them back together with the hose barb and routing them through a frame. And I'm also curious, since there is a set of brakes that's on the bike right now, if there's anything you would do to prep those while they're still on the bike before I remove them. My thought would be maybe I could use my bleed kit to press all the fluid out so that it's a little bit cleaner. Anything along those lines that you guys might have some suggestion for would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, guys.
Hi, Clark. Thanks for the question. So this is a question concerning basically replacing the disc brake hose and caliper and lever on your bike. You are fortunate, I would say, to have a fully guided, internally routed bike because not all of them are, and it's a much easier and simpler process when you do have it. So that's working in your favor. One little trick or one little tool that I like to use when I'm removing an existing, a fully bled system is there's a little tool. It's a product. I'm sure, Dave, you probably have a bunch of these in your drawer. It's a RockShox Reverb.
Yeah,
it's a red. It has two threaded ends. It's for allegedly the Reverb seat post, which was at one point a hydraulic system as well. But basically, you can thread a hose to a hose. One of the threads is reversed, so by turning it in one direction, it tightens in both essentially. And you can use like a 2 or 2.5 mil Allen wrench. There's like a little hole drilled in the middle of it, and you can spin it with that and tighten it. And so you have like a hose you can pull against and pull the other hose through. So that's one potential way that this could be useful for you. Although that may, in your case, not be super necessary because of the internally guided nature of your frame. So one thing I would suggest in general is to cut assuming your lever, hose, and caliper on your new system is all together and bled from the factory, cut the hose as close to the lever as you can. You're probably going to drip a drop or two of the fluid out no matter what, but if you cut it close to the lever, you'll eventually be cutting more of that hose later, and hopefully then the bubble or the sort of gap where fluid once was and dripped out is cut away too, and you have a nice, clean, well-bled line that you can then join back to your lever. And with SRAM in particular, you have the Stealth-O-Majig system, which closes the lever off so you don't lose fluid from the body, hopefully. And it's possible that you could do this without even necessarily having to bleed the brakes again at the end if you're very careful.
That tool that you mentioned, Brad, is called the RockShox Reverb Stealth Barb Connector Tool. And in Australia, it is $6. Which means if you're in America, it's even less than that. So, very cheap, very effective tool, and it also would aid in that, when you're pulling the hose through it, it kind of seals it off as well. So
exactly,
you're not
so you don't lose fluid
everywhere.
Yes,
yep.
Definitely a benefit. I actually can use that to grab too if I'm routing it through a handlebar, for example, and you kind of don't want to grab the hose with a thin needle nose or something to try to yank it through the exit hole. You can usually safely pull with a needle nose plier on that reverb the barb that's if you don't thread it to something else and kind of preserve the integrity of the end of the hose and not do any damage to anything. So very useful for $6. Oh, come on, buy two.
Yep. I don't have too much to add from what Brad said, but just with SRAM brakes, just do remember it's dot fluid, which is corrosive to paint. So just if you do drip any, just make sure that you're washing it off sufficiently with water from the frame, or from wherever it touches. But
maybe if you have some nitrile gloves or latex gloves, maybe wear those too, because it's not good for your skin or what's beneath your skin either.
No, and I would also say I wouldn't be drinking mineral oil either, but but yeah, certainly dot fluid's one to wear gloves for. So
yes,
yeah. Anyway, I think that's answered.
Cool. Last one this week is from Jeff in Torrance, California. Our favorite topic.
I have a BMX race bike, aluminum frame with a tapered IS4252 headset, and I was removing the headset the other day. Top bearing came out easy. Bottom bearing was very stuck. After many tries at removing it gently, I resorted to Kaylee's favorite tool of gentle persuasion. This, of course, ended up with my destroying that 52 lower bearing, and I had to get a replacement. For future reference, is there a nice, easy, delicate way of removing a stuck IS lower bearing? Look forward to hearing from you. Have a great day, guys. Bye.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for the question. This is a little bit of a different conversation about headsets than we've been having lately, which have been focused almost exclusively on the Ring of Death. But fortunately, you have a BMX race bike, which you don't specify whether the steerer is carbon, but I guess it's still possible these days. These BMX bikes now are pretty unbelievable. I'm not frequently in that space, but every time I see it, I'm continually impressed by what a BMX race bike looks like these days. Anyway, you have a stuck headset bearing in your frame, and this might be a sort of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of a conversation, where my real recommendation would be to frequently remove your headset bearing and service that where the cup in the frame and the bearing sits in it, and make sure it's clean and re-greased and that you don't build up corrosion or excess gunk that can cause it to stick like it did. But given that that's the situation you find yourself in, there's a handy tool. This is actually a Park tool, and there may be other ones like it, but this is kind of the universal way of achieving success with anything stuck in a frame in the bike shop. It's called the RT1, which I believe is just shorthand for removal tool or remover tool. And it's basically a 4-pronged kind of flared ended. So in other words, it's kind of sprung, not unlike the FreeHub described by Dave about the Lauf system, but it's a sprung metal end at one side that kind of expands to a certain diameter. You can kind of wedge it up in your frame and it'll expand to sort of the outer diameter of the head tube, and you can set it there on top of the bearing, and kind of has a hammer end on the other side. So from the top of your head tube, in this case, you would be able to tap it with a hammer, and basically the 4 prongs will expand out and evenly apply load to the bearing that's stuck in there, and hopefully tap it out with no trouble. So it's called the Park Tool RT-1 cup remover for headsets. It can also be used for other applications as well, but it's a handy tool to have around in the bike shop, and it's exactly for the thing that you're describing. So also for if you have a pressed-in headset cup, it's also useful to remove those too.
Brad, Park do two sizes of that one.
That's
RT1
right.
and
Yes,
RT2.
they do.
Do you think the RT1 is the better fit for that size of headset bearing? It's hard to know.
Might be an RT2, maybe an RT2 for that one. The RT2 is the bigger one, is it not?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would say maybe the RT2. You can kind of stick something up the middle and expand it further than it normally is. So sometimes the RT1
it's going to be close.
Is the way, but you'd want to maybe verify at a bike shop if it's possible. It's usually something they would probably do for just a few dollars too. And it would probably be cheaper than buying the tool for yourself. But if you're doing it regularly or have this problem often, it's probably worth the few dollars it costs. I think it's like a $35 or $40 tool. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing regular service like this and you frequently encounter stuck ones, then perhaps it's worth it. But a shop might knock it out for you for $5. So up to you.
A few other thoughts. You could use a punch if you really want to. The benefit of these headset cup removers is they get in right behind the bearing and do it much more evenly, which is why this is the preferred method. Another thought is a tool I was playing with just yesterday, which is Bursman do a universal head cup remover, which is basically the Park Tool RT1 and RT2 in one tool, and it's got like a I'd say it's like a quill stem wedge built into it, and you basically wind the top bolt and it expands those prongs out depending on the size of bearing or headset cup you're trying to remove, which is really cool. So it's that's another one to consider. Only just started playing with it. I mean, the park is well proven. And the final thought I have is, if the bearing's really stuck, maybe once you do get it out, maybe just check that everything's fine in that head tube, because I'm thinking if it's really stuck to remove and maybe it went in smoothly once, maybe you've overlised it through being too rad on the bike. So
True.
I mean, BMXs take a hell of a lot of load, and I'm thinking if that lower bearing is jammed in there, it could be that something's changed that shouldn't have changed. So
That's a good point too. And you said the frame is an aluminum BMX race frame, and the bearing, of course, is going to be steel, which is harder. So hard impacts to that zone would potentially allow for headset deformation in the frame to occur. That's a good point, Dave.
I've seen that exact thing happen.
Yeah.
With a road. Like, obviously, I wasn't on a BMX. You know me.
were you doing sweet jumps?
I wasn't. No. The frame. Unfortunately, the frame was just dropped on a concrete floor. Damaged the head tube so badly that it just could never. You probably could have got it fixed, but it was like a winter frame. At that point, it was a winter frame. It didn't start off as a winter frame. It just it had run its course anyway. But I have seen that happen.
Yeah. So a few things to consider there. But that Bursman tool I was actually just playing with, I'm going to include it in my next edition of Threaded, which will be a new tools day. So there you go. Shameless plug added that no one asked for.
Actually, I'm glad you added it, though, because I'm not even familiar with that tool existing.
No.
It sounds like a professional result of the ghetto solution I was describing, where you actually just cram something up inside of the park one to expand the legs.
Yeah.
But this is way better than that. Way better.
It seems pretty good. A little rough on the thread to wind it, but they give you, like, you can adjust it with a spanner or a 6mm hex key, so cool. It seems quite nice. And I didn't know about it either until I was as you do, just carefully looking through tool product catalogs to make sure you haven't missed anything.
Right.
Just a regular
and you
Tuesday.
haven't missed anything most of the time.
No. So
most often you have the entire catalog.
Yeah, no, I like to play collect them all. It's like Pokemon, but with financial irresponsibility.
Cool. We've got an answer for everything. Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for all of those questions this week. If you want to submit yours, you can do so. If you are an Escape Collective member, you can just head over to escapecollective.com/hello. And then you just introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and what's your problem with your bike. And we'll then help you sort it out. Well, not always. And as always, there's been a lot of new content out on escapecollective.com. Ronan, performance side of things, what's new, what's coming?
Earlier this week, I published a review of Wahoo's Tracker heart rate monitor, and early listeners to the Geek Warning podcast some 18 months ago might get the reference to a toaster in that piece. If not, I do explain it in the first line, so that'll make more sense if you open the review and read that. And later this week, Performance Process podcast, a new episode, this time with the aero coach himself, Xavier Disley. And it's a bit of a two-part. First part is out on Friday. The second part is out soon after that, and is actually the first part of a 6-part. I'm trying to be very confusing here on purpose. But yeah, this week, Xavier and I discuss basically the ins and outs of getting aero and easy wins, what's often overlooked. I think there's something in there for the most optimized of riders, and there's something also for those looking to optimize for the first time. So it should be a good lesson for everybody, I think.
Cool. And that's for members only?
It is for members only. Kind of wondering, we normally release half of it to non-members. Not sure we're going to be able to do that if this week's episode is half of an episode anyway. So I'm I'll see what we do there. There may or may not be a free sample of it.
You might get a quarter of the conversation.
Can you imagine what you're missing out on?
Yeah, you're missing out on a lot of gains that you would have got. Dave, anything you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we've just started to kick off our favorite things article for the year. So that's sort of where we round up the products that stood out to us most and left the biggest impression on us throughout the year. So I've done mine, and Ian Trelaw will probably have his live by the time you're hearing this. And then Suvi, I think you're next on the list after that to come a few days later. And some of these are member only. So yeah, if you want to sort of find out the 6 products that left the biggest impression on me, then you'll probably need to subscribe to Escape Collective, and I hope you have already. And then you can also listen to Ronan's performance podcast while you've done that. But the other thing that I quite like that we just published is Rob English, the famed frame builder. He occasionally writes a column for us, and his latest edition has just been published, which is looking over the history of him making time trial bikes. So he's just earlier this year he made his 3rd generation time trial bike, and we even got some aero insight from JP Ballard as to what JP thought of the bike just based purely on photos. So yeah, there's some fun stuff in there, but yeah, I guess some of the takeaways from that article are like, I think it's in the 90s maybe Rob was doing a 1x8 gearing on his time trial bike. So single ring way back. He's completely, done his own headset designs for many, many years, and dare I say influenced a lot of modern designs in that sense. And he's in his latest bike, he's even got like an eccentric saddle clamp for in the seat post. So if anyone's familiar with like an eccentric bottom bracket, he's built that into the seat post to give him adjustable height and fore aft setting, which some very, very creative things. So yeah, certainly check that out if you're into the geeky stuff, as I hope you are, if you've made it this far into a podcast called Geek Warning. So yeah, a few things to check out.
There's definitely quite a few things out there to check out. So do head over to escapecollective.com and read all of those. And tune back in next week, because this is the end of our show for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and do send us all of your questions and feedback. There's a Discord channel that you can also use to give us all nice comments and suggestions. So thank you, and talk to you next week.